Good morning, everyone. My name is Rick Graber. I'm president of the Bradley Foundation. It is great to be here. Our topic today is federalism. And certainly over our lifetimes, we've witnessed a frightening and really disturbing expansion of federal government, far beyond what our founders ever anticipated, and they truly did work hard to work against and to prevent. And that expansion of federal government has only gotten worse over the last 8 years under President Obama. Today we have the great privilege to welcome 4 outstanding governors to discuss these very significant issues of federal growth and regulatory overreach. And they really do bring a great firsthand perspective on why states can and should be the laboratories of change within our governmental system in the United States. Just a couple of words on each of our governors. Starting to my far right, Governor Ducey is the 23rd governor of Arizona. He was elected in 2014. He inherited a $1 billion deficit that he fixed. Thank you, Governor. He's consistently been committed to economic growth, job creation, educational excellence, restoring fiscal responsibility, and of course, protecting the citizens of Arizona. Comes to the job with a great business background. He worked for Procter & Gamble. He's also a partner and CEO of an ice cream chain called Cold Stone Creamery. Governor Ducey. Governor Sam Brownback from Kansas, the 46th. Governor of Kansas, elected in 2010. He's now in his second term. He's an attorney by training. Also, of course, a former congressman and senator. He signed the largest income tax cut in Kansas history in 2012. Been a champion for limited government, better education system, and creating an environment that promotes job creation.
That's great.
Our next governor, my governor, Governor Scott Walker, the 45th governor. In his second term, he was a member of the Wisconsin legislature, former county executive for Milwaukee County, and he won this heavily Democratic county in the wake of what was a huge scandal at that time, and then was easily reelected to that job. His accomplishments in Wisconsin have been very well documented. Of course, he survived a recall. He's brought about sweeping changes in collective bargaining rights for public employees in Wisconsin, and he's overseen an economy in Wisconsin that truly has revived itself. Governor Walker. And then finally, from the Commonwealth of Kentucky, Governor Matt Bevin, the 62nd governor. He was elected in 2015. He's the 3rd Republican governor of Kentucky since World War II. Served in the United States Army, rising to the rank of captain. He's worked in finance and in the investment world and in his family business. Been a strong advocate for low taxes, small government, sustainable energy, and a strong, locally controlled education system. So a great panel. Governors. Let's jump right into the questions. The first one is a 2-part question, and we'll go around the horn and ask each governor to give an example from your state where you're already handling a problem that really is best handled at the state level and not the federal level. And then follow up with that with another example of where you think you could really get a whole lot more done in your state if only the federal government would get out of the way. So let's start down on this end. Governor Ducey.
Well, it's great to be here. This is my first time at CPAC, and as a new governor and a conservative coming out of the private sector, I think one of the things I'm most proud of is the fact that we were able to balance the budget in Arizona. I think government should live within its means. And I always say, as someone who ran Cold Stone Creamery, you get a lot of undeserved popularity selling ice cream. Most of that goes away when you do balance that budget. But it puts you in a position where you can really start to make reforms. So in addition to balancing the budget, lowering taxes these first 2 years, we passed the American Civics Act. It's the test that every high school graduate is going to have to take to graduate in Arizona. It's the same test a new American takes. So these are things we've been able to get done at the state level that I think has been good common sense leadership. when I look at this new administration, I look at, the education category, the healthcare sector, and then of course social services. I mean, to me, we've got thousands of Arizonans that are out of work, and we've got thousands of job openings, yet we've got the federal government giving people a check every 2 weeks. We'd like to take these people and give them the job opportunity, the opportunity to build a fulfilling career. I think if we aren't in a position to ask Mother May I to Health and Human Services or welfare, we can really make the difference at the state level. And that's something I'm looking forward to advocating as a governor this week at the National Governors Association.
Great. Governor Brownback.
Yes, and thank you guys, and I'm delighted to be here at CPAC. I've been here multiple times. Fabulous organization, keep it up, and I want to ask you, you got to match the energy of the left with the energy from the right, guys. We've got to have good energy moving forward. We've got to be passionate about what we stand for. We've got to push, and push aggressively. There's a lot of motivation out there, and you've got to match that side to side. One of the things I think that we can do, and there are a number of things that we can do, I think, better than the federal government, but one that we've done in particular, we've got the numbers for, is welfare reform. Did a very simple thing, said, look, if you are able-bodied without dependents, you have to either apply for work or take job training to be able to get the payment from the government. And what happened, this is amazing what happened, we tracked everybody. We afterwards we said, okay, what happened? We had a decline in the welfare rolls, but people's income tripled doing that. They went up 120% on average, and we tripled the number of people getting out of poverty, which should be our measure in welfare, is not how many people you have on it, but how many people you get out of poverty. And this is a key thing that we need to do. I really hope it's something that we take on as a conservative movement, because the welfare programs that the left has put in place since the Great Society of LBJ have failed. Put trillions of dollars in it and put a number of people in a very difficult, if not a situation where they're just held down. And they need to be liberated and have the dignity that comes with having their own job and work and moving forward. We've proven that, we've shown that. We need to expand that and be given more opportunities from the federal government for us to be able to innovate at the state levels.
Right. Governor Walker.
Well, Rick, first off, I'm confused. When I came out here, I thought I see Arizona, I see Kansas, I see Wisconsin, and I see Kentucky. I think this is the Final Four show right here.
Could be. Could be.
Watch for all of us, right? Yeah. Sorry about the other schools.
We know who the champion will be, but that's...
Yes, we do.
I still got my bourbon for beating Kentucky a couple of years ago. So, actually, I would say on those two questions, one, echo exactly what Sam just said. Welfare reform, I talked about it a little bit before earlier this morning. Similarly, we had, when I first came in as governor a few years back, it was interesting, the person who was our Secretary of Department of Workforce Development, which is kind of like the Federal Department of Labor, that person said to me, what should be my measure of success? Because my predecessor measured how many more people they could sign up for unemployment insurance. They said that was bringing federal money into the state. That was their argument. I said, your measure of success is just the opposite. It's how many people no longer need unemployment insurance. Not because we kicked them out, because we helped them get a job.
Yes.
I mean, that's really, and I think that's a consistent theme you see from Republican governors. The other part of your question, Rick, was, what part do you think the federal government should get out of? I think the better question to that is, what part should they not get out of? Because to me, other than the military and maybe preserving things like Social Security and Medicare, I think just about everything else is better done by the states. I just reached into my pocket and I said, I never say the F word, the word you said, federalism, I'll say make an exception. I don't say that. I say because most Americans actually think that means more federal government. What I tell people is take a dollar out of your pocket, out of your wallet or your purse, and ask yourself, where would you rather send this dollar? Would you rather send it to Washington, where you get pennies on the dollar back, or would you rather keep it in your school back home? Would you rather send it to Washington, where you get pennies on the dollar back, or would you rather keep it back in your local community and in your state where you can fix your roads and your bridges? Would you rather send it to Washington, where you get pennies on the dollar back and very little performance? Or would you rather keep it back in your communities where you can take care of the needy the way you see fit in your state and not have the federal government dictate it? I hope with this new president and Congress, we can actually have more of that go back, as our founders intended, to the states.
Governor.
I'll tell you, in Kentucky, when I was elected in 2015, we had a Democrat-controlled House, the last one in the South. So it makes it difficult when you come in. They had had control uninterrupted since 1920. They had had the majority for 96 straight years, and it was expected that that would continue. We're a state heavily registered in the Democrat side of the aisle. All that to say, what the powerful thing about a governor is, not only as it relates to what we can do individually as states, but also in pushing back against this overreach by the federal government, is be sounding boards for good discipline, good ideas, common sense, foundational principles, the constitutional principles this nation was built on. And so we worked on things that we could get done from a bipartisan standpoint in the first place. But then I said, you know what, I don't want to have 44 out of 100 people, which is what we had when I was elected. So I spent a year also working to try to do something about that. With the energy of a lot of people like those in this room, we did do something about that. And now we have a supermajority, 64 out of 100 seats 1 year later. And in that first week of this new majority in the House, in 5 days, we passed right-to-work legislation. We repealed the prevailing wage. We passed paycheck protection. We abolished the most corrupt and crony board in the state. We passed a pension transparency bill. We put a 20-week ban on abortion, and we passed an ultrasound bill in 5 days. 5 days.
5 days.
Which goes to show the power. Leadership goes a long way, and these gentlemen I take a lot of cues from. They're all guys who have a lot more experience at this than me. I'd never been elected to anything in my life prior to being the governor. Frankly, it's everything you imagine it to be in terms of the bureaucracy. But there is the ability for us to influence things in a positive way. What would I hope the government would do less of? I'm encouraged by the people that are being appointed in this new administration at the cabinet level. I'm very, very encouraged. Because frankly, I wear this lapel pin. It's a pair of scissors cutting red tape. We need to cut red tape in America. And the wonderful thing about it, doesn't matter if you're a liberal or a conservative, it doesn't matter if you're a Democrat or a Republican or somewhere in between, nobody likes red tape. They may disagree on the red tape, but I also, while he was digging in his pocket for money, I reached in my pocket. Don't you think other governors would look good with a cut the red tape button? Don't you think? Here you go. Here's one for you. One for you. I encourage any and all people to steal this idea, including the federal government. We've pledged to cutting 30% of all of the red tape in Kentucky in the next 3 years. We have 130,000 rules. Pretty confident we could govern everybody with 90-some thousand.
Well, let's get into the weeds a little bit on the back half of that first question. In your day-to-day governing, where does it just drive you crazy that you've got to deal with all these federal regulations? Or what are the businesses in your state saying about those regulations? Maybe it's not you, maybe it's the people that you work for in your states. What is driving them the craziest about what's going on with our system?
As a conservative, we know that lower taxes makes your state more attractive to work or do business in. Also, the reduction of these regulations. We set up a website this year in my state of the state. I announced it as we launched it, called redtape.gov.az. And we want the small business owners to give us suggestions. And if it's a regulation that doesn't protect public safety or consumer safety, our team's going to do the research and get rid of it. There are hundreds of regulations. We have a goal to get rid of 500 regulations this year alone in the state of Arizona. The larger regulatory tangle and mess is at the federal level. And I want to echo what Governor Bevin said. I'm thrilled with this cabinet that President Trump has appointed.
Absolutely.
And even more so, that there is a former governor who understands what red tape can do at the state level, named Mike Pence, as vice president. And if we can get a joint cooperative effort in states compete and governors compete, and the world of ice cream, people vote with their dollars. In the game of states, people vote with their feet.
Yes.
And the better we can make our states. I think if you see the lower taxes, lighter regulation states versus the 9 highest tax states, you see people moving from one zip code to another state. 70% of the adults in the state of Arizona came from somewhere else. So I like to say people either live in Arizona or are planning on moving to Arizona. And that's the type of tax and regulatory environment that we want to have.
Great.
You know, I think on a daily basis, if you're asking the biggest piece, it's Obamacare. It's recent, it's been put in place, it's driven up insurance prices, it's driven people out of the insurance marketplace and into Medicaid. I think that's the one that really needs to be taken down. It needs to be addressed in a politically sound fashion, but that's the one near term. The other one, I want to back up on an earlier question. You said, what can we do better than what's handled at the federal level? I think we can deal with hot button issues better at the local level, and I'll say one right here. Roe versus Wade needs to be repealed, and that issue driven to the state level. Let it be handled by the states. That's what will happen when Roe is repealed. When it's repealed, the issue goes to the states, and then the states decide this is a difficult social issue. I'm pro-life, but this would be much better handled at a state-by-state basis, and people can look and adjust the policies as they see fit there. That'd be much better handled at a state level.
Sam mentioned Obamacare, and I think we all hear about that quite a bit, and I would echo that. I would just add, and I love the cabinet, I particularly love the new administrator at the EPA, Administrator Pruitt, who I think is going to be great. But I would stress on a day in, day out basis, we've made all sorts of reforms. We put in Lean Six Sigma and lean manufacturing principles. We've included in agencies like our Department of Natural Resources, which is our EPA equivalent at the state level. And I can't tell you how many times it's great to hear employers say, we're not done yet, but employers say, wow, the DNR, which is what it's called, is so much better to deal with than it was before. But, and there's almost always a but the EPA is still messing things up. And so I love the cabinet and I love the new administrator. My hope would be with this president, with this Congress, that they'd go further than just putting good people in, because what we've seen in our states is until you make transformational changes in those agencies, and you can have good people at the top, but the bureaucracy is still there, my hope would be that this Congress would not only help and work with the president and the administration to reorganize, and in some cases not just reorganize existing structures, but send more of it back to the states. The EPA, in my opinion, states could do that better. Let states handle that. There's 50 of us that have that. Let us do the ones that decide those decisions, not the federal government.
I agree completely with those things that were said, and it's interesting when you think about what is the one area where we have felt the most encroachment. It's hard to think of a single one. I think even of just the lawsuits, I've been governor for a year, the lawsuits that I've had to engage in on behalf of the Commonwealth of Kentucky against the federal government, pushing back against the federal government dictating who goes into our locker rooms and bathrooms in the public schools is number one. Number two, pushing back in a lawsuit against the federal government dictating which doctors would or would not, or in fact, in their instance, all would be required to perform sex change operations under fear of losing their license, pushing back on that. Pushing back on the overtime rule that came out of the Department of Labor that was trying to be jammed down the throat of small business. You mentioned the EPA, the streams rules, the methane rule. All these are just a handful of the suits that we've been involved in the last year. The Environmental Protection Agency truly has become a regulatory Frankenstein. It began arguably with good intent. You go back and you read Shelley's book about Frankenstein, it too was created with good intention, and it turned on its creator. Nobody wants to drink dirty water or breathe dirty air. There's not a state, Republican or Democrat alike, that to Governor Walker's point, could not manage this and would not be incentivized to manage this at the state level. We all want this. The fact of the matter is, whether it is the environmental, whether it's education, whether it's commerce, whatever the case might be on the energy front, is well, push these things back to the state level control. That is where federalism was intended to be in the first place.
So let's follow that line of thought. How do we make that happen? How do we, in effect, turn back the clock and return the power to the states? How can our federal representatives help us do that?
Let me say something on that real quick. You're how we make it happen. Literally. This is what a government of and by and for the people does. If we abdicate our responsibility, and this is where I'm begging those of you that are watching, but those of you, the thousands of you that are assembled here for this CPAC conference, the reality is of and by and for the people only works if the people get engaged. It only works if you truly knock doors, make phone calls, get engaged, talk to people, create dialogue like you've never done it before. Otherwise, it doesn't work. And the greatest demise of any culture, any civilization, or any form of government worth having, including the noble experiment that we've been blessed with by people who had brilliant minds 240 years ago. The only way this is preserved is if the people stay engaged, because the greatest demise always comes from apathy. Cultures and civilizations crumble from within. It is the apathy of the populace that destroys great civilizations. Don't let it happen on your watch.
No, Matt hit it right on the head. It's interesting. Just a couple weeks ago, we put out our state budget, and the immediate response from the media was, what are you doing to lobby the legislature to pass it? And I said, I'm not. I'm going out to the people. And so I spent the very next day and the day after and the day after traveling my state, making the case as to why the budget had merit in it, and asked them to call their representatives. Even though we have Republican majorities, as I mentioned before, that we've added to, it's still important for people, no matter what party they are, to hear from people who care about these issues. Because certainly, as we've seen in the last month or so, they're going to hear from the left. They need to hear just as much from you and from others like you across this country about what are priorities. And to this specific issue, again, I don't think we can stress it enough. It is important, and I think as governors, we've shown it in our respective states already, certainly Republican governors have, that it's not enough just to change the map from blue to red. It's not enough, and you got to have transformation. This is an opportunity, a unique opportunity in time to have transformational change just up the way in our nation's capital. And that means you're going to have to push for it, because you can see the challenges they're having right now just dealing with the repeal and replace of Obamacare, with the challenges they're having just dealing with comprehensive tax reform. In that city, under the circumstances and the environment that they live in, it is difficult to do those things. We can't be just satisfied with saying we've got a Republican in the White House and Republican majorities in the states. We've got to demand more, not just for ourselves, but really, as I asked for the hands of the college students who are here before, I think of my sons, Matt and Alex. For them, I don't want them to inherit the mess, even a mess that's controlled by Republicans in Washington. I want to inherit a country that our founders intended, which is one where powers were precisely spelled out for the federal government, and those that weren't concretely in the Constitution were inherently the rights of the states, and more importantly, the people. We need to demand that once and for all.
Two things come to mind for me. One is approve Judge Gorsuch to go on the U.S. Supreme Court. That would be a very helpful thing because of the dominance of the Supreme Court. And the second is to understand the philosophical underpinnings of what our society and our form of government is, and why socialism doesn't work. Okay? I mean, I think we need to, you've got the left moving hard towards a much more bigger government taking more, government doing more. And a lot of people on the left saying, oh, okay, yeah, that sounds like a good idea. No, this is a terrible idea. Since when have we added more government anywhere that's taken more taxes and you end up with a product that's more efficient that costs you less? When have you what's your example? But what we have seen is when you pull government out of something, you get a product that tends to be higher quality and cost you less because you got more competition for that. Look at your telephone, and when we used to have a lot of regulation. Look at your airline. When we used to have a lot of regulation, much higher, more expensive, fewer options that you had, and poor service. Why would we want to go that way? And I think you need to be able to talk and to articulate to people what are the philosophical underpinnings. And the final point on this, Michael Novak was a great writer, just passed away this past week. And I just got his book that I'm carrying with me to read, On Two Wings, where he talked about the forming of the foundation of this country on the two wings, and it was one based on the faith and the other based on the reason and the common sense of what this could produce and the fruit that comes out of this, the fruit of America. That is great. We need to understand that philosophical underpinnings and carry that on forward so we know what we would believe and we can express it.
In so many ways, the people in this room have done their job. We have a conservative House, a conservative Senate. We have a conservative that's going to be put on the Supreme Court. And what I said to my team on the Wednesday after the Tuesday election is that we can celebrate today, but we need to get to work tomorrow. The victory is not on November 8th. That is an assignment for change and real reform. So we need to see repeal and replacement of Obamacare. We need to see real tax reform. We need to see a federal government that gets its spending under control. So I think that as governors, as activists, as engaged citizens, we need to hold all elected leaders accountable for results in this cycle. Right now, we may not get the same opportunity again. We can't squander it.
Exactly.
Let's switch gears to a specific topic. Let's talk about K through 12 education. And all of you have focused on education one way or another during your terms. Arguably, the United States no longer has the best K through 12 system in the world. We're slipping by a number of studies. How do we reverse that, particularly in our big cities? There aren't many, if any, big city public school systems that are working. How do we attack that very tough problem?
This has been a big subject in Arizona. I was fortunate to have a governor that preceded me by about 25 years named Fife Symington, along with a superintendent of public instruction, Lisa Graham Keegan, who sowed the seeds with the first in the nation public charter school laws. I know that you know that a charter school is a public school with private management. Today in Arizona, we have 500 charter schools. We have 180,000 children in those charter schools. We lead the nation in parental choice. Arizona has 3 of the top 10 public high schools in the nation that are as good as any schools in the country. Our district schools have improved because of this competition and choice. And I think that this is the way forward, is to provide parental choice, provide innovation, let parents be consumers. They know what's best for their children. I think we've got a great model in Arizona. I think we've got an incredible Secretary of Education in Betsy DeVos, who believes in parental choice, and I think that that's the way forward.
I would answer that with a question. The data is what it is. I mean, you're seeing a slippage in our ranking for as far as the performance of our students globally. But higher education, I don't think there's another place in the world that has the quality of higher education the United States does. No comparison in our states, and we all compete. We all compete against each other, and so my guess is your kids graduated, and I had 5 children graduating. There was schools competing for them all over. We were getting mailings every day. We're looking at rankings, and you ask, well, okay, how did we get that one so right, and we're not doing so well in this other one? It's choice and competition with information. Yes. So you got a marketplace in one, and the other one you got kind of a state run without. So I think it's information. Schools should be graded so that people know. I think it's options. People should be able to have options, and so that you can have that sort of competition. We know how to do this well. If you just look at the higher education system, and one of my schools in Kansas that's going to win the Final Four this year. I mean, you know, we understand competition. Maybe we'll have 3 in it.
Well, Sam raised a great point. I've got 2 sons, one who's here with some of his fellow students from Wisconsin. Alex is a senior at the University of Wisconsin. My other son has been here for years, graduated last year from Marquette University, a private Jesuit Catholic institution. He's actually at work today. Thankfully, he's working. I said, you're really not an empty nester till they're off the payroll. So I got 1 down, 1 to go. But I often say, when we talk about choice, people say, well, what about that? I said nobody flinches when I say I got 1 son that was at Marquette and 1 son at the University of Wisconsin. Nobody goes, well, that's odd. No. Because they picked a school that was right for them. And as as a nation, both in the state and in the federal government, we give students assistance through financial aid and student loan assistance. We give them to both. Why? For your exact reasons. Good competition, we perform well, we have people from all over the world who come to our colleges and universities. So I think you hit the nail on the head. It's about competition, not only amongst different choices. So Doug talked about charters. We got charters galore. We had, similar to the history you mentioned, Tommy Thompson, about 25 years ago, helped create the first public school choice, or excuse me, the first parental school choice program in the nation in Milwaukee. My predecessor kind of pulled back on that. We lifted the caps, we lifted the income, we lifted the numbers, and you've had all sorts of families, because I trust parents. I trust parents to make the right decisions for their sons or daughters. But we also made a change, not only in terms of allowing for more charter and more vouchered schools, and we allowed it statewide as well. We also kind of broke that monopoly within the public schools. Because part of the challenge historically that public schools have had is under these union contracts, collective bargaining contracts of the past, they were stuck. And I remember years ago, long before I was governor, there was in the city of Milwaukee, there was a teacher who was the outstanding new teacher of the year as an English teacher for the entire state. And the state government, again, when Democrats were in charge, not me and Republicans, actually cut money to the schools. And so in turn, they had to make spending reductions. And what did they do under the old contracts? The last hired was the first fired. The last in was the first out. So this woman, who had been named the outstanding new English teacher of the year for the entire state, was one of the first to be laid off. Well, that makes no sense. It's illogical. She was exactly the kind of teacher you want in a place like Milwaukee in an urban school district. So what we did through Act 10, and now others are doing similar things around the country, we changed that. We broke that monopoly even within the public school system, and now public school districts in our state can operate like charter schools. They can hire and fire based on merit. Seniority and tenure is gone. They can pay based on performance. They can put the best and the brightest in their classroom.
I was struck by something that both Scott and Sam said, the word monopoly and the idea that the government being involved in something isn't necessarily a good thing. Digressing slightly and then coming back to education, think about this. Anytime the federal government has declared war on something, it means it's going to cost you hundreds of billions or trillions of dollars, and you will, after 50 years or more, end up with more of what you declared war on. And I defy you to think of any example where that's not the case. War on poverty, how's that working? War on drugs, how's that working? War on terror, how's that working? I mean, the bottom line is, it is a code phrase for taking your money. And the same thing has been done in education for a long time. It isn't to say that we don't need good public education. Thomas Jefferson said we need to use taxpayer dollars to educate young people, because why? We want to produce virtuous citizens. What is a virtuous citizen? It's somebody who's engaged, who is a fabric of their community, who is part of the integral part of society because they are working, and work is a virtue. There is a reason for this. Kentucky is one of 7 states where there is zero competition for public education dollars. That's about to change. We're going to bring charter schools to Kentucky. That will happen this year. That's legislation that hasn't passed, but I'm confident I'll be signing that into law. Number 2, it's important for us to recognize the fact that it is the idea that every kid coming straight out of high school needs to get a 4-year degree is nonsense. That's a fact. And we need to start to recognize the idea that we're sending every kid, 60% of the kids in Kentucky go straight on to college. Only 20% of them graduate in a timely manner or at all. The reality is we're sending kids down a path that we shouldn't be sending them down. So what is the alternative? How do they become virtuous citizens? How do we get good ROI as taxpayers for our public education dollars? The way you do it is you rethink K through 12. Maybe you start thinking about K through 14. In the 21st century, everybody's going to have some kind of post-secondary training, certification, whatever the case might be. So start focusing on apprenticeship programs. Start scaling things up that train people. Start reinvigorating at the high school level things like vocational training. Let's start having internships. Let's start being realistic with the situation that we're faced with. Last thing I'll say is this. We did 2 things. We put $100 million into workforce development, $100 million that said the only way the state is going to come alongside, first of all, we're not going to give you 100% of whatever you ask for. We're not building lots of new buildings. We're going to look at programs. What we're going to do with that $100 million is require the local high school the local post-secondary school, whatever that might be, technical school, four-year school, whatever, and the local business community, all three together have to jointly apply for this money. If all three start talking, good things happen. The first $65.5 million that we've put out is being matched by $85+ million coming from the community because they love their idea so much, they're going to do it whether we fund it or not. That's where good ideas come from. Young people deserve better opportunities in terms of education, and it doesn't just simply mean getting a degree in interdisciplinary studies.
Unfortunately, we're out of time. We could have this conversation for a couple more hours, I know. Boy, isn't it invigorating and exciting to hear what's going on in the States? Let's have one more great big round of applause for our governors.
Thank you.
Well done, brother. So I hope I wasn't waving the... That's good. Hey, Sam. Thanks, People being apologists. Good job, man.